Following a difficult birth, Mr. Brown chose to adopt a dog for his paralyzed son in hopes of improving the situation. A few months after the dog became part of their lives, something happened that left everyone completely stunned. On a hot afternoon in a quiet neighborhood in Montana, Samuel Brown had a storm brewing inside him. He had a lot on his mind, and was on his way to get what he hoped would be a solution to some of his worries. Today was his son's first birthday, and he was going to get him a memorable gift. The past few months had been tough for Mr. Brown, and the idea of throwing his son an animal-themed party had become impractical. So he had turned his attention to something he believed could make things better: a dog. Countless people had told him that a pet would do wonders for his son, even more than any doctor he could involve in his treatment plan. And since he loved his little boy more than life itself, he had welcomed the umpteenth advice like a man on a mission. As he stepped into the animal shelter, he was immediately surrounded by adorable dogs, all competing for his attention. Among them, an English toy terrier stood out, capturing his interest with its inquisitive stare. Mr. Brown had done some reading about different dog breeds, and he felt this little terrier could be the perfect gift for Ethan. It was small enough not to overpower him while they played, but still loyal and protective, and that's exactly the kind of dog his son needed. When his poor baby had entered the world, the delivery room had plunged into an icy silence. Ethan was crying, and Samuel had rejoiced at the sound of his healthy lungs working perfectly. The birth had been traumatic for both him and the mother, and for a long while he had feared the worst. But now he was here, and he was alive. But then the doctors had whisked the newborn away to a different room, not even allowing him or his wife to hold him first. He still remembered the looks on the nurses' faces, and how the weight shook him to the core. He had never felt such fear in his life. As he paced in the waiting room, he could vividly remember the image of his son lying in the hospital bed as the doctor told him that he was born with a damaged spine. He had been squeezed too hard inside the birth canal, and his delicate vertebrae had suffered severe consequences. Young Ethan was unable to move his lower body and might never walk again. The likelihood of him recovering the ability to use his legs was slim, but not impossible. Samuel held on to that hope with unwavering faith. When the doctor suggested countless sessions of physical therapy, he immediately agreed to them. He would have agreed to anything the doctor proposed, as long as he told him there was hope for his son. He wanted to be positive. He needed to be positive. Unfortunately, his wife hadn't shared his perspective. She was devastated to know that their little boy was paralyzed and blamed herself for his condition, despite the doctor assuring her that she had done nothing wrong. In the last few months, the sorrow had mixed with postpartum depression, turning her into a shell of her old self. She could barely stand to hug little Ethan, and didn't want to participate anymore in his PT sessions. Samuel worked late to keep up with the medical expenses, and she was often home alone with the baby for hours on end. He knew Ethan wasn't getting enough stimulation. When Samuel had suggested that they get a dog, she had simply shrugged. Secretly, he hoped the dog would help her as well. Since the wild birthday party they had planned before the birth was now out of the picture, he had decided it was the perfect time to adopt a furry companion, hoping that the unconditional love of a dog could somehow make Ethan's life happier. When Samuel's eyes locked with the gaze of the English toy terrier, he felt an unexplainable bond. He had learned about the breed's loyalty and affectionate nature, making it seem like the perfect companion for his son. Some experts believed that the physical engagement from an energetic dog could help strengthen a paralyzed person's muscles and determination, encouraging them to surpass their limits. Samuel didn't think that a dog could help his son learn to crawl or even walk, but he knew it would turn his boring days into amazing adventures. Taking the newly adopted dog home felt like the beginning of a new chapter. As Samuel drove, his mind buzzed with apprehension. How would Ethan react to this surprise? Would he be scared of the dog? Would the dog be scared of him? He would find out soon enough. Before heading home, Samuel stopped by a local bakery to pick up a cake. It was his son's birthday, after all, and he knew his wife hadn't baked anything. Alongside the cake, he chose a cute bow for the dog, a small touch to make the moment even more special. Returning home with the surprise cake and the cute dog, Samuel felt nervous but hopeful. He knew these next steps were important to make things better at home. As he opened the front door and allowed the terrier inside, his wife looked at him with a disapproving frown. "Are you serious?" she asked. "Now, I have to take care of both a child and a dog while you spend all day in your office?" Samuel felt hurt, but didn't let his smile turn into a grimace. He knew that his wife was suffering just as much as him, and that she would have to attend several more therapy sessions before she could consider herself on the path to recovery. He calmly explained to her that he had already spoken with their housekeeper, and that she would take care of the dog's needs in the morning, leaving him to deal with the evening walk. "The terrier will provide enough of a distraction for little Ethan that you could have more time for yourself," he said. She let out a bitter chuckle. "Do you want me to leave our son alone with a dog he doesn't know?" she asked. "Of course not," Samuel replied. He could feel his anger simmer, but he remained calm. "I just need you to keep an eye on them while they play." "He can't play. He can't even crawl," she snapped. "He will," he replied, his tone making it clear that the conversation was finished. She shrugged and took the cake from him while he went to Ethan's room. As usual, the baby was in his crib, clutching a plushie to his chest. He was babbling nonsense, but no one was there with him to engage in playful, nonsensical conversation. Samuel's heart broke for his child. He rarely left his room and had never even met another kid. But young Ethan was on the verge of gaining a companion for life. Samuel lifted his son into his arms, showered him with affection, and headed toward the living room. The dog, still adorned with its charming bow, let out a small bark as he stepped inside. Ethan's eyes lit up with joy at the sight of the furry friend, and his tiny hands reached for the terrier. Samuel put him down and sat behind him, whistling to catch the pup's attention. The dog stepped forward carefully, its tail wagging with enthusiasm. The boy extended his hand and gently touched its head, letting out a joyful squeal. For a brief moment, the atmosphere in the room felt brighter, and even Samuel's wife couldn't help but smile. Days passed, and the dog became a regular part of their home. Samuel made sure to feed the dog every morning before work. The housekeeper also took care of the dog, making sure it had food and water. However, Samuel's wife mostly ignored it. The dog was lively and full of energy, and Samuel quickly noticed a significant change in his son's behavior. The once reserved boy was now constantly laughing, eagerly asking to be placed on the floor to stay close to his furry companion. Every time Samuel returned from work, his son greeted him with a bright smile, and his babbling was gradually improving. A few weeks later, even Samuel's wife had to admit that adopting the dog had been a great idea. Ethan only wanted to play with it, and since the dog never shied away from him, she had more time to relax and take care of herself. She was now able to attend therapy 3 times a week, and her spirits were lifting with each passing day. She had also grown more affectionate toward her son, and after 2 months, she even volunteered to take both Ethan and the dog for a walk around the block. She was the one to suggest Dash as a name for the pup. Things were looking great in the Brown household, and it was all thanks to the tiny terrier. In the following months, Samuel noticed a positive transformation in his son. The baby, that could once barely lift his arms to be picked up, could now sit all on his own, and he had learned to bounce on his bum to move after the dog. Dash appeared to understand that his little friend couldn't run alongside him, so he patiently waited as the boy scooted across the floor, chasing after toys, balls, and anything else they enjoyed playing with together. Moreover, Ethan's PT sessions were finally giving the results he had been hoping for all along. According to the doctor, the muscles in his core were almost as strong as those of any other child his age, and his legs were strengthening as well. He couldn't crawl yet, but Samuel was hopeful. The transformation involved his wife as well. She finally came out of her shell and started playing more with both her son and the dog. Samuel often found her on the floor with them when he came back from work, and her happy smile made his heart melt. Dash, with his wagging tail and loyal eyes, had become more than a pet. He was his family's second chance at happiness. Observing the positive impact the tiny dog had on both his son and his wife, Samuel couldn't help but feel grateful for the furry friend who had become an unexpected source of healing. As the days turned into months, Ethan kept progressing. His doctor was overjoyed to share with the family that he was starting to flex his knees. When they left the hospital, both Samuel and his wife cried tears of happiness. Their boy had been born with little hope, but since Dash had entered his life, he had started defying all the odds. According to the doctor, his desire to play with the dog and run after him was pushing him to move his muscles, and his spine was strengthening in turn. He still didn't believe that he would walk, but he told the family that perhaps one day he could learn to crawl, and that day came sooner than later. Ethan was 18 months old when Samuel received a video call that made his heart somersault in his chest. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. His wife never called him when he was at work, so he picked up the phone with trembling hands, fearing the worst. He only heard her scream unintelligible words, but thankfully the scene she was recording spoke for itself. Little Ethan was crawling after Dash. The dog held a ball in his mouth and was jumping off the floor as if he wanted to challenge his tiny human to steal it from him. Ethan's legs were still bent at an awkward angle, but he was crawling nonetheless. And most importantly, he was laughing his little heart out. That evening, Samuel bought another cake, and the family had another party. This time, the atmosphere was completely different from the day he had first brought Dash home. Ethan was rolling on the floor, chasing after the dog. His wife was smiling, and he felt that life couldn't get any better. But he was wrong. One calm Saturday morning, Ethan and Dash were playing in the living room, while Samuel enjoyed the quiet on the porch with a good book. Ethan's range of movements had improved further, and it brought relief to everyone. He could now crawl with ease, and one time Samuel's wife had even seen him throw a little kick at a ball. Samuel still found himself smiling when he thought back to the birthday party they had thrown for his second trip around the sun. They had dressed little Ethan as a dog, and he and Dash had twinned all day long. By this time, both he and his wife felt confident leaving their son alone in a room with the dog. Ethan was still a pretty slow crawler, and Dash's protective instincts were always on high alert. However, Samuel was about to find out that his dog had developed a whole new set of instincts. In this peaceful atmosphere, where the only sounds were the gentle rustling of leaves and the occasional chirping of birds, Dash suddenly started barking relentlessly from the living room. Curious about the dog's sudden change in behavior, Samuel looked up from his book and called for him. The dog couldn't stop barking. Something was wrong, but the man couldn't quite determine what had caused Dash's unusual behavior. His wife was taking a quick shower, and he could hear little Ethan talking to himself in the living room. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Thinking that perhaps Dash wanted to play, Samuel decided to engage the energetic dog. He fetched a ball and tossed it toward the living room for the pup to chase after and catch. However, much to his surprise, the dog paid no attention to the ball. Instead, Dash continued to bark uncontrollably. Initially amused by the dog's antics, Samuel began to sense that there might be more to the situation than a playful mood. The persistent barking indicated a heightened level of alertness, as if Dash were trying to communicate something important. Now intrigued and a bit concerned, he decided to follow Dash to see what had captured the dog's attention. The dog led him to the living room, where Ethan was playing with some toy soldiers, standing on his own 2 feet. Samuel felt his knees wobble, and had to steady himself against the wall to avoid fainting. His paralyzed son, the child all the doctors believed incapable of ever walking, was standing straight on his legs. Tears started streaming down his cheeks, and he couldn't contain the loud sob that escaped his mouth. Little Ethan noticed his father standing in the doorway and frowned at the sight of his tears. "Are you sad, Daddy?" he asked, setting his toys aside to look at him. "No, Ethan," Samuel replied, attempting, but failing, to wipe his eyes dry. "Daddy has never been happier." The child giggled and returned to his game. Samuel willed his legs to work again and sprinted toward the bathroom, where he almost kicked the door down, knocking. His wife emerged, clad in her bathrobe, and he didn't even give her time to put on some clothes as he dragged her to the living room, where Ethan was still standing and playing. Unlike Samuel, his wife couldn't stop her legs from giving way. She sank to the floor, overwhelmed by tears. Ethan suddenly found himself facing another crying parent within minutes. "Mama, you too!" he squealed. He turned to face her, his tiny feet shuffling on the floor without losing either strength or balance. Samuel's wife let out another sob. "Can you come to me, baby?" she managed to say through the tears. Ethan looked down at his wobbly legs and frowned. He didn't know if he could cover the small distance that separated him from his mom. But that's when his best friend came to his aid. Dash ran toward him and settled next to him, letting Ethan put a hand on his back. Steadying himself on the dog, the 2-year-old child wobbled toward his mother. Samuel cheered for him, pushing him to find his balance. Ethan almost fell twice, but Dash was with him every step of the way, walking slowly to match his insecure pace. And when Ethan lunged toward his mother's open arms, even Dash let out a victorious yelp. The tiny terrier Samuel had adopted a year ago had just taught his son how to walk. Moved by the realization, he picked up the dog and hugged the furry hero. The incident forged a newfound appreciation for Dash within the family. Samuel couldn't shake off the shock of what Dash had done for all of them. In an unexpected turn of events, the little dog had helped Ethan overcome the odds, brought a smile back to his wife's face, and reunited his family. Dash might be just a small dog, but he had performed an enormous feat, and Samuel would always be grateful for him. Did you enjoy this story? Do you believe that the animals we love can work miracles? Has it ever happened to you? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Sometimes our animal friends can change our lives. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.